Johansen signs 8 years, $64 million. Wow. So here's the weird thing I'm finding this summer. Now, I've talked a lot about how GMs are being reasonable, and yet it seems like the RFA contracts, what the player's asking for, they're getting. Sometimes you'll see like some, player will say, well, I want 7.5, and they'll get 6.5. No, these guys are getting what they ask for. Tatar, 5.3. Red Wings are like 4.8. Tatar's answer, 5.3. And he gets 5.3. Johansen, there were some talks here and there about what Nashville might want to pay him. Johansen gets $8 million a year. Sorry, long work day. I'm a little thirsty. That's the first thing I've had to drink all day. So yeah, that's the way it works. But I'm trying to sort of wrap my brain around this. So Ryan Johansen is an $8 million a year player. God, I'm old. He's worth a $64 million contract. And I really think that if I try to say he's being paid too much money, I'm going to have a lot of people telling me I'm wrong. But 8 years. So right now he's 24. That takes him till he's 32. And I get that part of it. You are buying his UFA years. You're keeping him off the market for 8 years. But it just feels to me like a lot of these long-term contracts, there's going to be some buyouts out of these things. There has to be. Almost every contract you see right now getting bought out, or that you've seen get bought out over the last 2 months, they were all really good contracts at the time they were signed. And there were plenty of fans and a few GMs who'd say, that's a good contract. I just personally think 8 years is a long, long time. In a sport where injuries and other things can conspire and it blows up. At $8 million, I just... If you're an Oilers fan, you got to be like, well, Draisaitl's $9 million now. If Johansen's 8, does that make Bo Horvat worth 6 in Vancouver? It is all relative. And again, I feel like if I don't 100% agree with this contract and I say this seems like a lot of money for Ryan Johansen, it just seems like a lot of money. People are going to say I'm wrong. He's a number one center. He played really well. His play goes beyond the stat sheet and all of this stuff. But there is no trade clause. That is part of it. I think part of what's happened with this round of contracts is the dollar values have gone up because there's no certainty now in terms of no trade, no movement. Those have moved away, and now players are just taking the money. But, he scored 61 points in 82 games, and he had 13 points in 14 playoff games. But to me, it feels like for a guy who scored 14 goals, and again, and I know, and people say he does a lot more than that, and what you see is more than that. I get that. It just seems like it's a lot of money to spend on one guy. Who is he an all-star? If you pick an all-star out of Nashville, you're going to pick one of their defensemen. Is he the second all-star? Is he a third all-star? Do you go with Subban, Yossi? Does Rene right now qualify as an all-star because of the Stanley Cup run, and then you get to Johansen? This is what I'm trying to get at here. If you're talking about an MVP for Nashville, I don't know that I have him higher than about 4th. And if they're going to become the first place team that I have predicted on my board, Rene is going to be very important. Subban, Yossi, extremely important. Johansen's important. It's one of those contracts that's gonna bug me. And I can't I can't just do a video and say, well, this is a great move for Nashville and Johansen. It's a great move for Johansen. It is the only move Nashville could make. Nashville couldn't afford to start the season without Johansen, even start training camp. They wanted to get this done, and they had the cap room. Now they've got about $5.5 million in cap space left, so they've got room to play at the start of the season if somebody becomes available due to underperforming or a team's underperforming or whatever. They can pick up some salary. Nashville's in an enviable position. But again, when I look at these contracts, I look at that long term and I go, wow, that's a lot of money. And I know I'm a dinosaur for that. I know that, everybody else is going to be just like, oh, this is great. This is awesome. And I'm there on a certain level. Like, I get that if Johansen had played in the final against Pittsburgh, we have a different series. I don't think we have a different outcome, but we have a different series. I don't. This to me feels like a contract that years down the road gets bought out. It just feels that way. I could be completely wrong. Absolutely. He could end up going somewhere else with that cap hit. He could go to an Arizona or a Carolina or somebody who's got cap space. I always look at the long term. I know that's weird. He is a first-line center for Nashville. He is their best option, and they've signed him for a long-term contract. They never have to worry about this again, basically, because by the time this expires, he's 32. So at that point, it's a whole other ball game, probably a whole other management team. They pushed that rock so far down the hill, they can't even see it. It's not a big deal. But again, I just find the terms are so long now. And it's weird because I also remember back in the early 2000s when they talked about lowering the age of free agency. And it was important to them that free agency was at, I believe it was at 32, then it came down to 31, and then it came down to 28. And players wanted to have the freedom to say at 28 years of age, I want to play wherever. And there was some excitement about the idea that maybe these players are going to move around. Maybe, certain teams are going to be SOL, but certain teams could really be a popular destination. Sort of like Miami in the NBA there a few years back when somebody took his talents to the South. But instead, what we're seeing is these players just go, oh, I'll stay here for 8 years. I'll stay here for 9 years. I'll stay here forever. And it's like, it just feels like part of the fight back in the CBA of old just no longer applies. They got free agency at a younger age, and they've used it to just make more money from the team they're with, rather than say, I won't sign past my 28th birthday. For Johansen, that'd be a 4-year contract, still at $8 million per, and then 4 years from now, he could either say, I'll stay in Nashville, or I can go wherever I want. But he chooses to sign in Nashville. I respect him for that. And I respect Nashville for being able to do it. It's just, it is a strange universe that we live in. Because I do remember how important it was to players that they're able to move. And there was talk at the time that Steve Yzerman, Nick Lidstrom, these guys who've been with one team, that they're the dinosaur. It's never going to happen again. It's over. Star players move. Everybody moves. It's just part of reality. And one guy spending his entire career with one team is just over. That's really not the case. I know Johansen started out in Columbus, but if he plays out 8 years in Nashville after this one, that gives him over 10 seasons in Nashville. It's a damn long career in one city. It goes against where we thought players were heading coming out of all these collective bargaining agreement arguments. It's like players use that as leverage, get a GM over a barrel, and then they strike and they get what they want money-wise. It's smart, and it's actually having the opposite effect. We don't see trades like we used to. I think that's why no movement and no trade clauses are probably out. I think players realize now that in this cap world, they don't really have to worry about no trade and no movement. Because trades aren't made like they used to be. So now they can just get their money. Jeremy Roenick would have loved this setup. Anyways, it's an old dated reference. I get that. There was a, I know I've mentioned this before, but this is more for new subscribers. Jeremy Roenick interviewed after the NHL lost an entire season, and they talked to him about how entry level contracts were coming in and they were a thing, and they hadn't been until then. And they said, don't you feel kind of bad for rookies coming into the league that they won't be able to make the money that the rookies have prior to now? And his answer was, I've made my money, so I really don't care. It was brutal. It showed why people don't like him. But man, I appreciated the honesty. And there's a lot of guys in the NHL right now that are going to be shrugging, and, you know, come next bargaining agreement, there'll be a lot of guys shrugging and going, well, I made my money. So it's fine, whatever we do from here. I made my money. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.